maybe they're in with a good chance of actually having managed to win this. And that, of course, is probably the result that Sir Keir Starmer would have least wanted.
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
What do we know now polls have closed? Do we know anything about turnout? From Daryl Morris, we were hearing that actually we're still bundling votes, basically.
Yes, we, as I understand it, we don't have any firm information on turnout yet. I've seen some speculation that maybe the turnout is around the 45-46% mark that it actually was in the general election, i.e. that unusually for a by-election, the turnout may have matched the general election turnout, although, of course, this is a constituency in which turnout was relatively low in 2024. Beyond that, I think all I can do is to repeat what I think you've already heard from elsewhere, which is at least the mood music that's coming out of some of the commentary of those who are in the count, is that perhaps the Greens have managed to win this by-election. And of course, if that is the case, it will be a quite remarkable result. Hitherto, the Greens have never got more than 10% of the vote in a by-election. They have never won a parliamentary by-election before. And now, apparently, perhaps, still early days, maybe they're in with a good chance of actually having managed to win this. And that, of course, is probably the result that Sir Keir Starmer would have least wanted.
Reform have been saying it's Labour's sixth safest seat. To your eye, where does it rank in Labour's safe seats?
I think I made it the 39th safest Labour seat, and that's defined as the share, the Labour's percentage share of the vote, or whoever happened to be second in 2024. Perhaps what's equally interesting is what I've also worked out is that there are as many as 244 Labour MPs whose lead over the Greens in the 2024 election was less than the 30-odd point lead that Labour had over the Greens in Gorton and Denton. So basically, well over half of the Parliamentary Labour Party would have reason to be concerned about their own safety if, and again I emphasise if, the Greens have indeed managed to sneak this constituency.
So, John, we've got the situation where we've got Labour and the Greens and Reform apparently in contention, according to all the surveys that were taken during this campaign. But equally, this is an English by-election where the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats are also runs and could even lose their deposits tonight. I mean, that is a massive shift in just the sort of landscape of British politics, isn't it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, the Conservatives, I think, have already conceded that they've lost their deposit in this by-election. Sure. I mean, one of the fundamental questions facing British politics is what is the future of the traditional two-party duopoly of Conservative and Labour. They, of course, won a record low share of the vote in combination in the 2024 election, less than 60%, and they are in combination running at less than 40% in the opinion polls. I think now, I mean, if indeed the Greens, certainly as they claim, or at least first or second, if it's also Reform who are their principal competitors in this constituency, then apart from the exceptional result in Rochdale, when the Labour Party basically withdrew their support from their candidate and George Galloway ran, it would be the first by-election at which two parties other than Conservative and Labour would have shared first and second place. But it may be that Labour, even if the Greens have won, that Labour will end up second, and that won't be quite the case. The other thing, just to note, second by-election of this Parliament, second by-election to be won by one of our two challenger parties. All the way round, you can see how the shape of British politics looks very, very difficult. I mean, if you go back to what was happening in this part of the world, just 30 years ago, sure, it was Labour dominated, but between them, Labour and the Conservatives were able to win 80 and 90% of the votes in the area now represented by this constituency. We are in a very, very different world.
And I think I'm also right in saying that Tony Blair didn't start losing by-elections for Labour until his second term, i.e. 6 years in, whereas this has happened in what some people in the past might have seen still a honeymoon period for Sir Keir Starmer.
Well, the truth is, of course, is that despite Labour's parliamentary landslide, at 35% of the vote across Great Britain, this was the lowest share of the vote ever won by a party that secured a parliamentary majority. The difference between politics as represented at Westminster and the politics that's reflected in the ballot boxes was bigger than it has been any previous election. So Labour's foundations, when they went into government, were much weaker than perhaps they might have wanted, and they weren't particularly successful at reconnecting with working class voters, which was one of their objectives. And of course, they also lost a lot of ground amongst those who identify with Muslims. And both those issues are in play in this constituency because it has a very substantial Muslim population, and that will almost undoubtedly be a key foundation of the Green success if indeed they have won this seat. But equally, Reform clearly were challenging Labour for the white working class vote in the Denton end of the constituency, which is not particularly affluent. In a sense, this constituency in particular helps to exemplify how two of the traditional pillars of Labour's electoral coalition, one, working class voters, and two, Britain's ethnic minority population, how those two pillars are now much weaker and perhaps in Gorton and Denton have been proven sufficiently weak that Labour haven't been able to hang on to a constituency which, let's remember, as recently as 2019, they were reckoned to have won, if this constituency had been in existence then, 66% of the vote. I think one thing that does therefore seem to be true is that although some people have been unhappy about the character of the campaign, about claims made by various parties whose veracity has been challenged, about the extent to which the parties were always keeping to the rules, about ensuring that it was clear where the leaflets that were being distributed were coming from and which candidate they were supporting. Despite all of that, it perhaps has been good for democracy in the sense that it has encouraged people to get to the polling stations in probably rather higher numbers than we would normally expect in a by-election in this kind of constituency. Of course, it will mean that whoever emerges as the victor, I think we should still remember that the victor may well emerge with a very low share of the vote. The other figure I've got in my head, remember for the night, is that hitherto the lowest share of the vote that's ever been won by a by-election victor is 30%. Will that figure now be beaten with whoever wins getting less than 30%? But that said, if indeed it's been won on a high turnout, it's going to look a rather more impressive victory than would otherwise be the case.
And just before we let you go, Sir John Curtice, if that is true and we get into either record-breaking territory or just above 30%, how do you think that changes how parties think, how they strategise and construct electoral coalitions, if actually you need a little more than 30% of the vote to be victorious?
Well, of course, what we saw very heavily in this constituency in the campaigning were desperate attempts by both the Greens and the Labour Party to try to convince voters that they were the better able to defeat Reform. And certainly a lot of the parties, and particularly the Labour Party, have been talking in a way that's trying to frame electoral contests as being a choice, in Labour's case, between them and Reform. Of course, what all of this makes us appreciate is that if indeed we've now entered an era of five-party politics, but we still have a single-member party electoral system, then arguments about who can beat whom in which constituency and who has a chance of winning potentially become important. But if, and only if, it becomes clear to voters who indeed is better able to defeat whatever party it is they don't particularly like. And I think almost undoubtedly one of the things that's happened in this constituency is that in the end voters were not very clear at all as to who were able to defeat Reform, and that maybe indeed Labour's clearly quite strong attempts to try to convey that message did not work. That will suggest, I think, that perhaps insofar as Labour want to challenge Reform, simply relying on these kinds of tactical arguments and trying to say to Green and Liberal Democrat voters, well, you may not like us very much, but you better vote for us because Reform were even worse. That maybe actually Labour need to be able to come up with a rather more solid message that conveys actual positive reasons as to why voters should be voting for the party, trying to rely on these other negative ways of going about things.
Professor Sir John Curtice, if only we could talk all night.